It gets worse when you move from the selection bias on students to the funding. Because the way it often works, and the way it works in Rhode Island, is that the money follows the student. So if you're in the public school and you are selected for a charter school, then a certain stipend of money goes with you to support that charter school. The problem is that as that money gets taken out of the public school's budget, the costs in the public school didn't follow you to the charter school. The money followed you to the charter school, but many of the costs remained. If one child leaves a public school classroom and goes to a charter school, you still have to turn the lights on, you still have to hire the teacher, you still have to heat the building, you have maybe one less pencil and one less piece of paper in the room, but those are tiny costs. The fixed costs remain. And that is a very serious threat to public schools. And anybody who truly supports the charter school movement, as our charter schools do, has to understand, first, the selection bias problem, and understand that the testing and accountability has to be fair between public and charter schools. And second, this funding problem, that if you're simply pulling the money out of the public schools into charter schools and the costs are staying behind, what you're doing is crashing the revenues but leaving the expenses of public schools. And the public school students are, of course, going to suffer from that. And if you don't adjust for it, you're being unfair to the public schools and you're being unfair to the students. This is a serious enough problem that our Providence City Council is debating the issue right now and trying to figure out, as students move to charter schools, how do you provide adequate funding so you're not stripping the public schools of what they need to continue to teach the other students? And not only are they serious about it at the city council level, trying to figure out this budget equation, but Moody's, the service that looks at municipal budgets and determines how sound they are and rates municipalities, have looked at this problem of charter school movement and the remaining costs in public schools and identified it as a fiscal threat to municipalities. So these are both real problems. And the refusal of Ms. DeVos to grapple with them suggests to our charter school leaders and to me that this is not just an effort to enhance students and being able to go to a good charter school. This is actually an attack on public schools. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why somebody might want to knock down public schools. One is that they simply don't like teachers' unions. Teachers' unions tend to vote Democratic, let's face it. And if you want to cripple teachers' unions, destroy the schools they work in. Now, that's a really nasty reason to get into this charter school fight, but it's real and it's out there. A second is, if you want to bring for-profit investment into this space, a lot of money gets spent on education. People who can figure out how to make money in this space want to get their noses in, and to get a chunk of that money, when they come in, they may or may not do a good job, but they're highly profit motivated. And if you are interested in trying to facilitate them and to give them a money-making opportunity, then you may well want to damage public schools in order to support that move to for-profits. So this creates a fairly significant problem when you connect it to the next piece of Ms. DeVos's application here, and that's conflict of interest. One of the basic elements that we're here to look at in our advice and consent process is conflict of interest. Will the nominee be able to do a fair job? Will she be looking at things fair and square, or will she have conflicts of interest that impede the fair exercise of her judgment? Well, one place that we need to look for conflict of interest is when we have nominees who have run political dark money operations. This is a new thing for us. Not too long ago, we swore in a new president, President Barack Obama. And when we did, we had ethics rules, government ethics offices, filing requirements, and all of that in place. That was 2008. Then came the Citizens United decision, one of the worst decisions that 5 judges on the Supreme Court have ever made, and it opened up the floodgates of dark money. Well, this nominee is a practitioner of the dark arts of dark money. And we know nothing about what she has done. But the conflicts of interest ought to be pretty obvious. If you raised millions of dollars from people in your dark money operation, then there's an indebtedness there that somebody might think could be an appearance of impropriety or of conflict. We should know so that evaluation can be made. Or if you spent dark money in support of certain things, we again should know so that we can connect the dots and evaluate the linkages and see whether it's a conflict of interest. Well, we wrote to Ms. DeVos about this. The first letter was on January 5th, 2017. We got an answer, and the answer was spectacularly incomplete and unhelpful. So we wrote back a second letter on January 27th. And I'd like to just take a minute and read this letter because I think it explains our predicament. Elizabeth DeVos, Trump-Pence Transition Team, Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. Dear Mrs. DeVos, thank you for your response of January 17th to our January 5th letter. Let me ask unanimous consent that the January 5th letter be made an exhibit at the end of my remarks.
Without objection.
Our January 5th letter requesting additional information on your vast political fundraising and spending network. Along with various responses and objections to our request, you produced a series of already public campaign finance reports related to the American Federation for Children Action Fund, a 527 organization, and its various state affiliates. For the reasons that follow, we view your response as, while sizable, non-responsive. We requested you provide information about 2 501c4 organizations with which you've been associated, the American Federation for Children and the Great Lakes Education Fund. You acknowledged your association with these entities in your disclosures to the Office of Government Ethics. You also acknowledged in your letter to us that, and I quote, each organization with which you have been involved is independent, end quote. It is not clear what you mean by independent, since you have already acknowledged your association with these organizations. I hope you can appreciate how both fundraising and spending of these organizations, from whom, to whom, in what amounts, your personal role, might produce conflicts of interest in potential decisions before you, if you are confirmed, to serve as Secretary of the Department of Education. Our concerns are not hypothetical. As known contributors to your political organizations have had business before the Department of Education. For example, Vahan Gurigian. In 2010, Gurigian donated $100,000 to the American Federation for Children Action Fund. Mr. Gurigian founded and is the CEO of CSMI LLC, a Pennsylvania charter school management company, and helped found the Chester Community Charter School. He has been a major donor in promoting charter schools in Pennsylvania. I'll interrupt reading the letter for a moment to point out how obvious it is that somebody that involved in the charter school movement could very easily have business before the Department of Education. And who knows how much he gave? We know about $100,000, but it could be a lot more. He knows. She knows. But the public won't know. And when bids or competitions are up, that's simply not fair. On to the next one, and back to the text of the letter. J.C. Wizenga. Between 2005 and 2007, Wizenga donated $25,000 to All Children Matter. And in 2010, he donated $30,000 to the American Federation for Children Action Fund. Mr. Wizenga founded the National Heritage Academies, a for-profit charter network that has 80 schools in 9 states and has received over $43 million in federal funding. According to a 2012 review by the Michigan Department of Education, of the schools in the focus category due to significant gaps in achievement, more than half were managed by National Heritage Academies. It has been reported that Mr. Wizenga said that his involvement with charter schools was due to realizing that, and I quote here, privatizing public education was not only practical, but also desperately needed. So again, to step back out from the letter, here is somebody who is in the for-profit charter school business, whose charter schools are more than half of the troubled charter schools reviewed by the Michigan Department of Education, and who wants to privatize public education, and he's linked with her through the dark money operation. And we don't know anything about the dark money side. David L. Brennan, back to the letter now. Brennan donated a total of $200,000 to All Children Matter from 2004 to 2007, prior to AMC's wind down due to campaign finance violations. This is the series of campaign finance violations that led to the $5 million fine that neither the entity nor Ms. DeVos have ever paid. That steps out of the letter. So now back to the text of the letter. In 2010, he donated $39,000 to the American Federation for Children Action Fund. He is the founder of White Hat Management, LLC, a for-profit charter school management company that operates 15 schools in 3 states with over 12,000 students. Since 2008, White Hat and its affiliates have received $3.6 million in federal funds, including IDEA funds. How are we ever going to know if people like this are making big dark money contributions into the dark money operation that she runs, that they will not be rewarded in a pay-to-play fashion with grants and favors and an advantage in competition at the Department of Education? You'd ordinarily evaluate that by knowing that the conflict of interest existed. But because it's dark money, we'll never know. They'll know, she'll know, but the public will never know, the Senate will never know, the press will never know. So, back to the letter. While you may not have a direct financial interest in the for-profit education enterprises headed by those listed above, your political fundraising relationship with them and perhaps others could cause a reasonable person concern over your impartiality in matters involving them. Let me step out of the letter again. Doesn't that make sense? If you were applying for a grant before the Department of Education and your competitor was somebody who had given, say, $1 million to Ms. DeVos's Action Fund, wouldn't you want to know that? Don't you think the public should know that? If you were to find out later that that had taken place and they were awarded the grant and you were not, wouldn't that rankle a bit? Wouldn't that suggest that you perhaps were not being treated fairly because of that big contribution that was made? But we'll never know. We'll never know. We are disabled from doing our constitutional job of reviewing these nominees for conflict of interest when it's dark money that's at stake. Back to the letter. The OGE process, the Office of Government Ethics process, does not capture conflicts that arise through political activity. This is the first transition of presidents since the Citizens United decision. This is the first one, so there is no history. We have to do it now, but we are not. Not for this nominee, not for other nominees. We are leaving a black hole of secrecy around this enormous conflict of interest potential. The OGE process does not capture conflicts that arise through political activity, so it is incumbent upon us to assure the Senate record is complete as to such conflicts and how they will be resolved. We continue in the letter. These are just the publicly known examples of potential conflicts. Our original request asked you for information to assess potential conflicts with 501c4 organizations that are not required to publicly disclose donor information. Accordingly, we reiterate our request that you provide, 1, a list of all donors, their total donations and affiliations who have contributed to the American Federation for Children 501c4 and the Great Lakes Education 501c4 since their inception. And 2, a list of donations made by you, members of your family, and foundations or organized with which you are affiliated to other 501c4 organizations over the past 5 years. That seems like a perfectly reasonable request. We continue in the letter. According to the American Federation for Children's IRS Form 990 filed for the year 2014, it spent nearly $1.1 million on political activities just in that year, including a $315,000 transfer to the American Federation for Children Action Fund, Wisconsin IE Committee. So how this works is, I think most people here know, but just to make it clear for people listening, many political organizations require that the donors be disclosed. So if you want to engage in the dark money game and hide your political influence seeking, what you do is you take your money and you give it to a 501c4, a dark money operation. And then they in turn give it to the political action group. That's what happened here. $1.1 million into the American Federation for Children, $315,000 transferred to the American Federation for Children Action Fund in Wisconsin. The only function that that provides is to launder the identity of who the donor was, so that all you see is the money emerging from the dark money organization with no transparency as to who put it in. So back to the letter. Because donations to a 501c4 are anonymous, they effectively launder the identities of donors to the other parts of the political apparatus. But you know, and the donors know, and therein lies the potential for conflict of interest. Additionally, you refuse to disclose donations to 501c4 organizations that you, your family, and your foundation have made. You explained the information requested has no bearing on the office to which I have been nominated, nor the duties of the Department of Education. That was her answer to the first letter. Our letter here continues. Your donations to 501c4 organizations are indeed relevant to your nomination, just as your donations to political candidates, parties, and causes are. One obvious instance would be where groups to which you've made political contributions are before the department as advocates or grant seekers. Again, you know, and the donors know, and therein lies the potential for conflict of interest. Senators have a constitutional duty to provide advice and consent on presidential nominees, and understanding the scope and nature of potential conflicts of interest is at the heart of that duty. I do hope that we can agree on that in this body, that part of our advice and consent role is to understand the potential for conflicts of interest. If we can't agree on that, then we have a real problem here, because that's the purpose, or at least one purpose, of what we do. I continue in the letter. Your role in raising and distributing dark money clearly raises the possibility of such conflicts. As a result, we renew our request for information related to your 501c4 organizations as outlined above. Please contact us if you have any questions regarding this request. We look forward to your additional information and disclosures and timely and responsive answers. Well, as of today, what we have is no answer at all. No answer at all. Mr. President, this is a recurring problem here. This business of dark money not being caught by the rather obsolete, in that respect, government ethics reporting conventions that have been carried forward from the Obama transition before all of this became a problem, doesn't just apply to Mrs. DeVos. Now Secretary of State Tillerson, as CEO of ExxonMobil, ran a massive dark money operation. ExxonMobil has got money all over front groups that deny climate change, all over political groups that try to discourage action on climate change, and a lot of it is dark money. And there's been reporting that traces it back to Exxon, but we never know how much because it's dark money. And Mr. Tillerson hasn't told us one thing about it in his hearing. We'll be shortly considering the nomination of Scott Pruitt as the EPA administrator. Scott Pruitt ran a dark money operation as the Attorney General of Oklahoma. Why would an Attorney General want to run a dark money operation in the first place? That's a whole separate question. But he did. It was called the Rule of Law Defense Fund. And what it did was it took in money, prevented the donors from having their identities revealed, and then funneled the money publicly to the Republican Attorney General's Association. It was an identity laundering machine for the Republican Attorney General's Association for big donors who didn't want anybody to know who the source was of the money that was being funneled into the Republican Attorney General Association. Fine, I guess. I'd like to be rid of all of it. We should pass the Disclose Act and clean this mess up. But for sure, when somebody who has run a dark money operation comes before the Senate seeking to be nominated to a cabinet office, while we hold a constitutional duty to protect that office from improper conflicts of interest, surely then their role in the dark money operation should be disclosed. It only makes sense. But no, like Ms. DeVos, absolute stonewall on any information related to the Rule of Law Defense Fund and Mr. Pruitt's dark money operation. A black hole of secrecy and enormous opportunity for conflict. Because obviously, given his background and given where the rest of his fundraising went, you can draw reasonable conclusions about where the dark money came from. Devon Energy, ExxonMobil, American Petroleum Institute, Murray Coal, the usual suspects. That's where a lot of his other money came from. You got to believe it went here. But do we know that? No. He could have taken $1 million from one of those groups and then, as EPA administrator, be ruling on an application of theirs, and we wouldn't know. Please don't anyone tell me that that's not a potential conflict of interest. I mean, we can deal with alternate facts around here, but that's just crazy. We don't know about Ms. DeVos' dark money. We don't know about Tillerson's dark money. We don't know about Pruitt's dark money. It's as if there's been an understanding, some secret handshake around here that nobody will allow dark money information into the nomination process. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. And it infects this nomination of Ms. DeVos. We have got to get answer to these questions. Let me move on to one other point. Student college debt. I had a meeting recently. I think all of us have the same experience. From our home states, groups come to visit us and to get our time and to bring our attention to problems that concern them. And I think we all get visits from the same groups. We get visits from our community bankers, from our home states. We get visits from our credit unions in our home states. We get visits from the automobile dealers in our home states. We get visits from the insurance brokers in our home states. And we get visits from the realtors in our home states. When the realtors of Rhode Island came in to visit me the last time, they raised a new issue that I had not heard before from them. The issue that they raised was, we're starting to have a real problem financing houses for the next generation of home buyers, the young home buyers who are coming into the market and who would ordinarily be buying their starter homes. And the problem that we're finding with them is that they are so loaded up with college debt that we can't finance the purchase of a home for them. That's how enormous the student loan debt problem is in this country. It is now preventing so many young people from buying a home that the realtors have noticed and put it on their problem list as something for us to take action on. If the realtors have noticed this, I don't think it's asking too much for a nominee for Secretary of Education to have noticed this. And if in fact she has noticed this, I don't think it's asking too much for her to have thoughts and a plan, because we are well over $1 trillion in debt for these kids. I think it's about $1.3 trillion now. It's been a known problem for some time. Over and over again, Democrats have tried to find and propose solutions here in the Senate. Over and over again, we have been shot down, but it remains a very considerable issue. And you would think that a new Secretary of Education coming in would want to hit the ground running on this issue. She'd have something she wanted to get done to solve it. There would be a plan or an outline. We may not agree with it. It may be something that we have to work together to find a way to get it to the floor, but at least there'd be a starting point. All I got was, well, I'd be interested in your views on that issue. How is it possible that with over $1 trillion in student debt piled up, with the student debt problem so severe that even realtors have put it on their to-do list to get something done about it, that a nominee for the Secretary of Education has nothing, pockets out, nothing to get started on this problem? Is she ever going to take an interest? I don't know. But it would seem to me, particularly when you look at where we are in the Help Committee, our ranking member is here, Senator Murray. Senator Murray and Chairman Alexander helped lead us together through the ESSA, the Reform of No Child Left Behind, the Every Student Succeeds Act. It passed roaring through the Senate. The House even picked it up and took it. It came out of committee unanimously. States are still working on implementation of it because it's freed them up to do a lot more things, and so they've got to go through the process of deciding how they're going to take advantage of its new freedoms. So with respect to elementary and secondary education, we're actually in pretty good shape. All we have to do is implement the bipartisan popular law that we passed. So where is the attention going to be? Well, what we haven't passed is the Higher Education Reform Act. So if you know at all what's been going on education in the Congress, which is not asking too much of a Secretary of Education nominee, you know that we have just implemented a major reform of elementary and secondary education, and that our next order of business is higher education, and that an elemental part of that is going to be college debt. So the fact that this nominee has nothing on that issue and is in the traditional deer-in-the-headlights nominee mode of, well, I look forward to working with you on that, Senator. Oh, yes, I understand that that's a serious problem, Senator, but actually I don't have any ideas. I don't have any plan. I don't have any strategy. I've got nothing. Let's just work together on it. That's not very convincing. Not very convincing to me. I see the senator from New Jersey here, and the night is going on, so I will yield the floor to him, but I'll close by saying that this recurring question about nominees who are involved in dark money operations and then refuse to disclose anything about their dark money operation so that it remains a black hole of secrecy and potential conflict of interest is wrong. It is just wrong. And I know there are forces in this building that love the dark money, and there are huge special interests behind the dark money. And there are a lot of people who benefit from the dark money who don't want any light on it ever. But once a nominee has had their name put in for a cabinet position of the government of the United States, by God, they ought to disclose their dark money connections, because otherwise it is an avenue towards conflict of interest, and where there is conflict of interest, there comes scandal. It is our job to head that off by getting the information before the public so everybody can evaluate it, and we have been kneecapped in that effort by an absolutely positive shutdown from the other side of the aisle on any information about any dark money from any nominee. They don't have to be nominees. If they don't want to cough up their dark money information, they can turn the papers back in and tell President Trump, find someone else. I'd rather keep my secrets. But you shouldn't keep your secrets and get the job.